welcome to another edition of Resisting Pretense. And we're here to have honest conversations about a life of faith in modern culture. And we're doing it today with James Salassi. Did I pronounce that right?
Salassi.
Salassi?
That's
oh,
the one.
Really?
Yep.
I've said it wrong for months now.
So is the rest of the world. You just kind of accept it.
Are you from New York?
No.
Sounds Southern.
It's French.
Is it French? Okay.
Yeah, French-Italian.
Salassi. Okay.
Yeah, but it's all a lie. Like, we immigrated over here, and it used to be Gelosi.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but
Okay.
we didn't find that out until Ancestry.com. Realized our life was
23 and me, I found out I'm not knowing who I thought it was.
That's funny. So James, part of our church family, and super involved in our Haven ministry, which is for kids that kind of need some extra special attention. And I'm super excited to have you here. Why don't you introduce yourself more comprehensively for us?
Yeah. Do you want me to get into my story as well?
Yeah.
Well, can I just ask a question of you first? Since this is a series, do you want to talk about what the series is?
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah. There's a reason we invited him to be here.
There's a reason I invite you to be here too, so I remember stuff like that. So we are... I don't remember if we ever named the series.
There was a name in the last series that we thought it'd be fun to do, but I can't remember what it is.
And we can't remember it. Yeah. So this is I can't remember the name series. So previously we did a series that I jokingly called OK Boomer, because it was all a bunch of baby boomers telling us all the changes they've seen in the church. And we thought, it'd be really smart to have like the next generation or two like down. Although we skipped X, which is my generation. So I don't know why we get no attention. It's been our problem all along.
It's the way you like it, too.
Right. It's because we're too busy taking the attention.
That's right. So, and I assume you're a millennial, by like...
I Googled it and confirmed I am.
Okay, yeah. I assumed by like how old you look, because I don't even know how old you are, and by the age of your kids, I just kind of assumed you're a millennial. But millennials, maybe some Gen Z will have involved in this one. Just saying, what's your perspective on the church? And so we don't have a title for it yet. Maybe we'll recover that title before all the recording is done.
I'm going to go back and listen to our old podcast just to see if I can hear what it said.
I can't stand hearing myself talk that much. So, so anyway, that's where we're getting into the next generation's perspective on church and what the church has done wrong, what it's doing right, what it could do looking forward. So with that, now, who are you?
My name is James. Hit it. I'm 37 years old.
Salassi, yeah.
37 years of age for the record.
All right.
So we can get that. So well within the millennial time frame. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Southern California, San Bernardino County, high desert, right?
Yeah.
And actually very oddly similar to
where
Yuma.
in San Bernardino County?
Hesperia.
Okay, because I had a friend who grew up in Tehachapi. So I've been around that area a little bit. So.
Old stomping grounds, it's oddly very similar to Yuma. Hesperia is it's like 3 times the size, but it like looks the same. When I got here, I almost immediately fell in love with Yuma. It felt like
wow.
Yeah, which I don't know if a lot of people say that.
No, nobody says that. Actually. Yeah.
But
everybody says Yuma grows on you. It's not like you fall in love with it. Yeah,
I heard that. Yeah, but I grew up in the church. The church that I grew up in was very strange to me because it was like speaking in tongues. It was lots of healings on random Sundays. Understanding my brain and how it works now. I know that I didn't understand it, and I kind of feared it a little bit because it was unknown to me, and I didn't have a reason of like why they were doing that. I'm sure my parents explained it to me, but it was just it was different. But I knew that church was good. There were good people at the church. It was just I was finding my footing and had low confidence in why I was actually kind of going to church, right? Later in life, as a young adult, I reattended church. I was always involved, but it wasn't on my own volition. So as a young adult, high school aged, I had a lot of friends who went to church, and it was kind of like what this group of friends did. And I'm lucky that I had that influence, but we just kind of went, right? They had free coffee, they had cookies, and my friends were there. So I was there, but I was there intentionally. Moved out to...
Had your parents stopped going then?
No, they're always involved.
Oh, okay. So it almost sounded like they had stopped going and then you chose to go. But no.
We switched churches a couple times.
Oh, okay.
You know, it seemed like there was always something that happened that it was a reason to change to a church. But no, they grew up. I had a Christian foundation.
Okay, got it.
It wasn't absent. But just my desire to go and learn was pretty low, just being honest. I moved out when I was 18 to Carlsbad. It was the first time where I was out on my own. And I found myself again knowing that I needed to be in church and making intentional decisions to go, but also not really having like a firm confidence. I'd say that at that time I was a very like low informed Christian, but I knew it's where I was supposed to go. And I was working at Macaroni Grill at the time. I hadn't quite yet started attending college, and so I was working at Macaroni Grill, and I had a friend who invited me to church. His name's Colin. He invited me to church, and I was like so taken aback by how confident he was in asking me to go. Like, I don't know if he saw something in me or was just kind of doing his thing. He was just this surfer kid, asked me to go to church. And I did. And
where was it?
It was North Coast.
Oh, now I'm self-conscious.
Yeah. It was North Coast. What were you thinking?
I was wondering if it was North Coast, because Carlsbad, I mean, that's like the church in that area.
Yeah, yeah.
And now I'm self-conscious because you've been to a way cooler church than you're at now.
Yeah. Well,
Did you hear that? Yeah.
yeah. You know, moving on. But it was about that moment in my life of seeing a guy who had enough confidence to ask me to go to church, and I think that's what I always wanted to be.
Yeah.
I just I could never see myself doing that at that time in my life. So I went, and I was taken aback because it was such a cool church. I was going to the Jordan. I was going to a young adults ministry, and I was seeing, like, if my impression of early church was kind of like, oh, it's a little bit weird, I don't quite understand it. Later in life was like, oh, okay, like some of my friends go. Now I was taken aback because they were completely normal, functioning people,
right,
who were going there, who, dare I say, they were cool. And it was important for me to see that in my young, not quite fully developed brain years. And so there I am, and I met some really good people, and that was the first time I attended North Coast. Met my wife at Point Loma. I went there kind of the following year, and Point Loma is an interesting place. It was, I blame a lot of stuff on Point Loma in a completely good way.
It's a great school.
The way that I approached life in leadership is based off of some of those years that I had there, right? But it's also a very interesting experiment in life, because you're at this insulated school with a bunch of people that are on fire for God, right? We're there, we got a central purpose, but it is not quite in the world. Right. So you're learning lots of stuff. It's developing leaders, no doubt about it. But there's a little bit of bubble wrap that's around it.
Oh yeah, I had the same experience. Well, I went to George Fox up in Oregon, and like we would occasionally. I think there were times we might have played you in different sports leagues and that kind of stuff. And there's definitely it's insular, not terribly unhealthy in an unhealthy way, but definitely noticeable.
Yeah, I mean, that's a science experiment, because you're going there, and I have on one side of the
spectrum for faith. Yeah,
it is, right. And me, again, low confidence Christian, low studied, and I got people who, and this is not meant to be an insult, but I'm developing the spectrum. Kids who were homeschooled their whole life within, because it's a Nazarene school, which I didn't know what Nazarene was. I didn't know a thing about denominations, and they grew up in it, knowing they were going to go to Point Loma, right? So we've got this kind of broad stroke generalization, sort of lower social skills, just from that side of the spectrum, to like the surfer, cool, authentically genuine, just person in the world that you would say, like, that's a great person. Come to find out they're a Christian kind of thing, right? So there's just a social spectrum that you saw there,
right?
And I was somewhere in the middle. I don't quite know where I was, but transferred in there, met my wife, and went to graduate school, and she was working. She was a nurse. She was working in LA County, and I got into the Navy. It was a program I was trying to get into for several years, and finally got in. And so 3 days after my oldest was born, went off to Newport, Rhode Island, and did officer development school.
All right.
Yeah. So, my naval career is like demarcated by the birth of my oldest daughter. So I always know kind of how long I've been in because of her. As long as I
right.
can remember her age, yeah.
And in the Navy, you're a physiologist, currently mostly working with Marines because you're at our Marine equivalent of Top Gun school, kind of.
Indeed, yeah. Yeah, it's got a fancy title. It sounds fancier than it is most of the time. Aerospace and operational physiologist. And yeah, my job, I get to play around with night vision goggles and like lasers and stuff. Like it's cool. But
Did you ever know Shane? What's their last name?
Litzenberg.
Yes, Litzenberg. You know Shane?
I know of him.
Okay.
He's senior to me, but yeah, Litz.
Yeah. So he was at Stone Ridge. They were in our small group. I coached soccer with his wife. She helped. She was on the soccer staff at that local high school, and I coached their daughter. Was one of our players. So yeah. So I got to know a little bit about the flight physiologist role through them. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think for him, this was the first church experience. Like his wife and daughter always went. This is the first time that they ever hooked him into church life. And he got connected. That was really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So anyway.
So my community has legacy here.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I see it.
Any other details you want to fill in on your story?
Yeah, there's a few more, I think, foundational things. And the way that as I was approaching answering these questions, because there's some tough questions I think you're asking, is I lean really heavy into my history because I think that it helped me internalize and understand how I was going to answer your questions. Right. So as the story goes, I'm in the military now. We've been in since 2014. So it's 10 years. We've lived in 4 different states, 2 different countries. Right. We just most recently came from Japan. And yeah. And so there's some pros and cons with that. I think the biggest thing, if I were to start with the cons, is like naturally what you think about for military is just that we're ripped out of normal every 3 years. Yeah. Right. And sometimes shorter than that. So not only our personal lives, friends, our kids, but, as the story goes now, our churches, like it takes us about a year to warm up, right? So you're catching me right at a year here. And so we're nice and warm. And that's usually when we start to get involved, just kind of the way that, the way that the military is. So we've gotten to experience those things. But the other flip side of that is that we get to go explore new places. We get to meet people from all walks of life. Like the military is already a melting pot, but now we're going to different geographical locations and feeling that. And we get to experience new churches, different perspectives on ultimately, right, the same mission that we're fighting after for God, to get to know him. But it's just different because I get to experience churches because we have to.
Well, and they all have different personalities. They're like people. There's no two that are really the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because I never would have been afforded that opportunity if it were not for the military. Right. So I'm shaped very much by those perspectives, by those different experiences. Like if I were to say, like, obviously this is my perspective on the questions that you guys are asking. I am a sum of all of my relationships and experiences. And it just so happens that I've had a lot of churches in my recent past that we can kind of lean on and ask questions and challenge ourselves with.
That's great.
Which I love that perspective because, some of the people that we may have on, their cultural perspective is only from living in Yuma or in this area. And so that is going to have a whole different spin than what you have because you've been able out to see, even outside of the United States, even some of the Eastern religion, how that's played into your perspective. So I think it's going to be really interesting to hear.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, the answers to your questions. So or answers to our questions.
Yeah, but I mean that's interesting, right? So if I were to, my story, if I were to really say the difference between me then and now, if I were to put a demarcation on it, it's having kids, right? That was, James Christian before kids and then James Christian after kids, right? As like reading the room, I see that the head nods, right? You guys know, like the questions we talk about, like what are our kids going to say, right? The conversations and questions that I find myself answering on a daily basis that I don't expect to be answering are quite hilarious, but you laugh because you felt that, right? There's
Right.
a lot of wisdom and experience in front of me. So I'd like to say that that's where my Christian walk really changed, was having kids, and profoundly changed going to Japan, right?
Really?
You brought up profoundly,
Wow, cool.
which is interesting as we get into some of the next answers. But just being there, we went there in 2020, you guys, right? So think about that.
So you escaped COVID. You were out of the country.
Yeah, yeah. If only.
Yeah, that was it.
Japan was
Because COVID only affected the United States.
100%, right? But they're it's a very conforming country, right? Like it's almost the polar opposite of America. Is like they're told to do this and they do it, right? So we fell into those rules and we didn't mind it at all. We, like, if there was an outbreak, like 2 weeks later, it was gone because everybody did the thing. They did the distance and it was gone. But it was good to see, not, if that sort of tells a little bit of tale of how they operate. There's a side that I just wasn't expecting, and that's the compassion. The complete compassion and generosity. You will be lost in the middle of Tokyo in the busiest train station in Japan. They see that you're lost, and it doesn't matter. Like, this happened multiple times. They will take you in their best attempt to try to speak English, or like sort of the pointy talkie we do, right? And then we'll walk you a mile to where you need to be. They have like this social contract. It's a very safe place. I don't know if you know how safe it is. Like,
no, I don't know that much about Japan other than, what I've learned through anime. Yeah.
yeah.
And people coming to our church should have been there.
Yeah, it maybe that's why it caught me off guard so much too, is because I didn't know a thing, right? And I think we see new and different as being fearful of it. And so, boy, my surprise when you have experiences like that, well, to walk you a mile where you'll have a kid who's in first grade, they're like, 3 foot nothing, and they walk 45 minutes to school. And if they get lost, you'll have just any person on the street walk them to where they need to be.
Wow.
I've had people chase me down because I left a plastic water bottle at a restaurant because they wanted me to have it, right? And so just total compassion in many ways. Like that's probably the top of the iceberg. We were floored by the compassion that we received from them.
That's super cool.
And so, and that being there during 2022, it shaped a lot of my, I think really the trajectory probably of my life and shared experiences from there.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. We ready to dig in?
Let's dig.
All right. Scott, where do we start?
Where do we start? I would be interested. It's easy to go bad, good, or good, bad. So I'd be curious to know, from your perspective, where you see in your life's experience, and whether that's Western culture, Eastern culture, where's the church succeeding? Where are we doing things well?
Can I flip that first?
You can.
Sure.
You're the guest. You can do anything you want.
Yeah.
We're just along for the ride.
I suddenly feel
Powerful, huh?
yeah, this is great.
We still can shut your mic off. Let's be clear about this.
I got video. It's hard to erase
Yeah,
it. I
that's
heard
right.
if it's on the internet, it stays.
That's right.
And the reason I approach this is because I'm an optimistic person, right? If I get into a low point, I will always find silver linings out of it.
Gotcha.
So I want to start from the hard.
Okay.
Like, if I think about what's the mission of the church, first of all, right? And I'm not a theologian. I am just the quintessential, just average churchgoer. And I think that when I try to define like what the mission is, to answer those questions, three things come to mind, right? I'm an educator. It's always going to be 3 bullet points for me.
Do they all start with the same letter?
Sometimes.
All right.
Color coded.
You sure it's just not like you're a closet preacher?
There you go.
I think that ultimately, when I get down to that, I think about we have a church, and the mission of the church is to bring us closer to God, right? It's to get us, the members, to feed them so that we can love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbors, right? The Salassis, we hang our hat a lot on that second one, right? But the job of the church is to make a person feel equipped in those areas so that they can then bring others to God. And it's that second part, which is the tricky part, you guys. You know, I toy with that. I think a lot of reasons I was so uncomfortable at an early age was because I didn't know how to do that. Like the church I was going to, they were, you know, I'm stealing a line from a previous pastor, but like, you know, the people who are like yelling like, you're going to go to hell if, you know, you don't go to church, you know, the Jerks for Jesus, as it was called. And I thought that's what outreach was. And, you know, Chris Brown at North Coast Church, was
that his phrase?
That was Larry Osborne.
That sounds like Larry.
Larry the Wise, right?
Yeah.
And there's this moment Kate and I talk about a lot, and we refer to it a lot. We call it the bumper sticker moment. And he talks about how if you watch NASCAR, you know, you see all the different advertisements, right? You see M&M's huge on there. You see how big it is, right? But then he asked the question like, hey, how much is that little one down there? The one that's barely on there. You can't even see what it is unless you got binoculars. And it was absurd how many millions of dollars it was
really
to do that, right? And so his point was, right, like you see that car, you see it driving, you see what it represents as it's going through the race. It does really good. You see, oh, it's the M&M car, you know? And so he said, as we are driving through life, like what is your bumper sticker, right? Like what is it that people will look to and be like, oh, that's what they represent. And his point, the point I took from that wasn't that I have to have this shirt that says like Jerk for Jesus, this hat, whatever. It was that we could accomplish that without your actions are so important, the way that you act, and to get somebody to ask you like, what is different about that person, was very important to me, because I knew that's where my sweet spot was acts of kindness, was looking out for people, sticking up for people who didn't have the ability to do that for themselves. And I could do that in a way that was authentic to myself. Right. So if I define that as really what my interpretation of what the mission is, then I kind of flip it and I think of like, okay, like how are we missing the mark a little bit? Right. I mean, hey, my daughters came home a couple weeks ago and they were like giving the fruits of the Spirit, and they were kind of spouting off. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Right. We talked about my daughter earlier before we started recording. And she hears the fruits of the Spirit and she thinks, you know, that's the way that we're supposed to act. That's black and white. And I had the ability to see many churches, many different people. And if I were to say that, hey, when one of our duty stations, we were attending North Coast again, I was filled in this sort of insulated friends group. We were all Christians. We weren't perfect by any means, but we were all Christians. Like I could turn to one friend and say, you love God, to the next, you love God too. And it was a shared interest that we had, our shared North Star. In Japan, it wasn't like that. We're in a large base, you know, as far as overseas bases go, and it's just it's a melting pot, right? You know everything about everyone on a base like that in Iwakuni. And we found ourselves, without even really realizing it, drawn most towards people who were non-Christians. Great people, but people who you come to find like, oh, like they're not a Christian. That's so weird, because you're the person who's so well involved in the community, taking care of kids. You're taking like stranger kids on the street, like whatever, like you just stopped and you took care of that person. You're a good person. You stick up for others. You're kind. You have amazing self-control. And we were just baffled. Like these are non-Christians who are doing this, and they somehow they're representing fruits of the Spirit. And in contrast, the thing that we struggled with making sense of was the people that we had observed to be the roots. And again, remember, this is 2020, 2021, all the way up to 2023. There's a lot of division that's going on because of COVID. Right. And we're on a small base in Japan under rules that most Americans do not agree with. Whether it was the right thing or not, they didn't agree with it. And we found the opposite of the fruits of the Spirit. And when, you know, like, talk about the bumper sticker analogy, right? Like, literally, that was a person who had the bumper sticker of the church that we went to. And we found ourselves just really critical of ourselves in the way that we were representing Christians, what we thought that we were supposed to be doing, and just a little bit taken aback by other people who were calling themselves Christians who were acting towards other people. And that was serious conflict for us guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's a broad stroke, right? That wasn't everybody. But like I said, our friend group is mostly non-Christians. It's just kind of how it worked out. It's just we were drawn to. And one of our good friends, we're still friends with him now. He non-Christian. He said something to me that gave me pause for a long time. He was like, I didn't know that Christians were actually nice people until I met you guys. And I was like,
oh, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because like if it's taking it back to me, my observations in Point Loma, I'm in the military too, so it's a different kind of mindset. And I'm thinking, if this is how non-Christians are looking at us, like we're missing the mark a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it broke my heart, right? Obviously, they also, they had some experiences with Christians, and after analyzing that, I'm like, oh well, like man, that was another one of those instances where like they didn't act very. I think it was a misunderstanding on what it meant to be a Christian. So that was that experience, right? And we had a couple other friends too who just said some things to us, and it just it hurt. It was like a visceral hurt of like, man, that's not how we're supposed to act.
I think we have we like the American church historically have a sadly poor track record of being known almost more for what we're against than what we're for, and by the things that we stand against and maybe the way we stand against them, which is sad, because I agree, like that core mission is to love God with everything you've got, but to love your neighbor. And if that's not clear, then the mission is not being.
Yeah. So we were in the midst of really struggling with that and what it meant. And I found a great church out there. Pastor Glenn out in Iwakuni. I'd never been to a Calvary Chapel before, so that was, again, you can't be a Christian consumer when you're at a place like Iwakuni, because there's like one or two churches, and you go and you make the church work and you're a part of it, right, to make it better. And other places you can shop churches, right? So it was a great church there. And so I see, we're heading to Yuma, and we had this really profound experiences, really tight-knit family in Japan, and went through that period of interesting division with just the time frame and things that were going on in the world. And then we come to Yuma, and we're excited. We're kind of on this high, like, right? We just went through one of the hardest life experiences. Like, moving to a foreign country in 2020 was not on my bingo card. How difficult that was, right? And I think that if we go to present day, I think that, if I'm just frank with you guys, I think that it's felt really heavy lately. The United States, I think, some of the division that you feel, and I'm not a huge social media person. In fact, we stay almost completely off of it, and out of necessity we keep it, right? Like the Facebook marketplaces and things like that, right?
Oh, I ditched it all.
Yeah.
I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't. So I just ditched all of it.
But regardless, in a time like this, we still rely on the news, right? We keep ourselves informed. I find that I need to be informed geopolitically for what I do as my job. So I can't avoid it. And so the things to me have felt really heavy lately, because again, I'm coming off of this understanding of what I thought it meant to be a Christian, right? What I truly believe, fruits of the Spirit, and how important that is, what our bumper sticker is. And I found myself over the last couple months just really taken aback by the bumper sticker of, some of our leaders across the churches, right? If I'm a broad stroke for the church as a body, as a whole, and leaders that were like, what I thought were representing the name of Christian. And that's a name that, to be a follower of the way of God, of Jesus, right? To see how cool that story is, and to just be on fire for it, and then just to feel like it's a total misrepresentation. It was like this visceral cut. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like desperately wanting some sanity, like needed a sanity check. I needed a life buoy, and Kate and I are, I don't want to say spiraling, but we're in this very low spot on what we thought we were feeling about what was going on in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And then lo and behold, right, it's probably one of the lowest points that we've been, if I'm speaking for myself, mental health wise, on what was going on. I got a life buoy, and that was in the form of the last 3 weeks of your sermons.
Oh, really? Wow.
Mm-hmm. But I think that it'll make more sense if you understand that how low we were feeling about some stuff, right? And I think if we were to go back in this chapter and hear some of the things that are being said on TV about different people, the hate and the division and chaos, I think that we would come back to understanding like how low that I was really feeling, and in desperate need of just a leader of the church to come out and just give a sanity check, right? And so then here we have conversations about how to be, how to listen, how to talk, right? You don't know this, but one of the things that I hold near and dear to my heart as a leader in the military, as a father, is quick, slow, right? Be quick, very quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, right? And there's so much science behind it, you guys. Like, talk about, so as a scientist, right, I'm already attached to it because I'm like, yeah, that's great. But that's something I believe are some of the most important things in a leader, is to be a good listener, to think critically about what you're about to say, and don't say it too fast because your amygdala gets hijacked in moments of stress. Take 10 minutes, take 20 minutes, right? And so these are the lessons that you learn. And I guess I missed a large portion of this, but North Coast got me on fire for God, for church. You know, I realized that I was being fed by the need to understand. And it's a Bible teaching church. And for me, that line by line was exactly what I needed to hear to get me to study, to read, and all of that stuff, right? So you guys delivered messages on quick, slow to me. And I can't tell you like what that did to my wife and I. I don't know if you noticed this when you were teaching it, she was in tears the majority of that time. And I was with Haven. And the week before, you may not have realized, or maybe you did, she actually had to walk out of the service. She was so overwhelmed and maybe a little bit anxious, right? In a good way.
I think she came up to me afterwards and thanked me for the message, if I remember correctly. That the week on listening, if I remember correctly, and that means a lot, because actually we don't always get. Usually the feedback we get is just like, if people like it, they say nothing, and if people don't like it, then they say something.
Naturally.
So I always take it. It's precious when people come up and go, "Hey, that was really." I really appreciated that. I know that's. I know they're not the only one, but it's nice when you felt like you did something meaningful and somebody confirms. It's always nice.
Your wife walked by, and it was almost like a passing comment, but it was like she wanted to say it, but if she said it too slow, she was going to break down crying. So she just kind of walked by and said, "You don't know how your message touched me," and then off to the bathroom.
So you found out she's an introvert.
Yeah.
We couldn't stop talking about it, right? And it's the bias of recency. Like it was last week, right? So it's most on the forefront of our memory. But I need you to know how impactful that was.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Feeling like the way that we felt and desperately needing, right? So I'm now rolling into, what is the church getting right? Like, talk about the delivery of a message at the exact time that the body needed to hear it. You need to know that was important. And it was a life buoy. We were above water now. And what did the church do right? What did Stone Ridge do right? And in a way that was so elegant too, right? If I go back and like as a church, right, we can't be partisan. You're feeding the church body, and we're all different types of people,
right?
And that's the beauty.
I always think of Scott as very elegant. Yeah.
Do you? Oh, as the Coke comes out the nose.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I can see
Our
the
our
lipstick on the pig.
podcast is unofficially sponsored by Diet Coke coming out of the nose.
Yeah. Yeah, so there we are. We're being lifted up. You took an approach that I thought was, despite Tom's joke, very elegant. And you said something right. So if I think about things and I replay in my head, that was so great about that is he said something to the effect, because you were talking about the debate, right? You didn't pick a side. You just objectively observed about it, and you said that may be the way politicians act, but that is not the way Christians act.
That was elegant, by the way. I agree.
It was so impactful, because think about my experiences. Think about the things that I'd been through, how important I think it is to be quick, slow. And, when you have your kid coming home from school and they're saying just like outrageous things that are clearly like at home, and how can I prepare my child to react to something like that? And I don't know, right? It's a growing experience of being a parent. And we're always trying. We're all trying. And so there we were in observance of that, and just really just taking it all in. And he said a line like that, and total redemption of humankind at that moment for me. So thank you. Whatever planning went into that, and maybe it was just a timing thing of how that fell, but it was just exactly what our ears needed to hear. Right. So that was what I think Stone Ridge, whether planned or accidental, just is nailed. So thank you for that. I think that, what do you think? Is there anything else on that one you want to dig into?
It's interesting. People who aren't like wrapped up in church life don't necessarily know all the behind the scenes stuff. In fact, one time I hired somebody to work in the office, and they lasted a month because they said, I love you guys. This is great. I love being a part of stuff, but this is ruining my church experience, because I used to be, I'd go to church, and then everything that just happened seemed, I think she used the term magical, not meaning like actual magic, but it's like it just all comes together and it's beautiful and I love it. And she's like, and now I know all the planning that goes into everything, and who did what, and all, and who made that graphic and who made that handout and all that. And she's like, it was just ruining church for me. I was like, I don't want to ruin church for you. Feel free to step away and just be a part of the family, and that's fine. But there's another layer of that for like people who that's your career. And so like Scott and I'm sure you've read some of the same stuff I have, but like people talk about, there's almost a guaranteed way to grow a church right now in our cultural setting. And it's to be partisan, to be like hardcore partisan. If you come out really strongly, and it can be on either end of the political spectrum, you're guaranteed to get numbers in your church, because people want someone that basically champions an ideology. But what you're getting is people committed to that ideology, not people committed to the way of Jesus. And essentially the moment you say or do anything that from their point of view seems to depart from that ideal, then they're gone. And we very purposefully said that's not who we're going to be as a church, that we want to be a place where, you may be sitting in the same row as somebody that politically may have different beliefs, even theologically may have different beliefs about what certain parts of the Bible say, but we're going to be united around the core truths about Jesus and his message, and other people can go chase the flash in the pan ideologies, but we want to stay pretty committed to the fact that the message of Jesus really isn't political. Like, it should affect your politics, but it's not political. And I don't know. I'm assuming you read some of the same stuff I do on that kind of almost pandering to a particular crowd is a way to grow a church, but I don't think it's a way to create a healthy community of faith.
I would agree with you, and I think that that's one thing that from long time coming into this church that was very stated, very clear that we aren't going to take a stance because we have both people in our congregation and they both love Jesus, and they may have different perspectives, but that doesn't necessarily make them wrong. Doesn't make them right. Doesn't make them anything other than another person having an opinion. But we both have the same opinion about Jesus. And that's what makes us that is that common thread that keeps us together.
Yeah. I think we've also lost the ability to have a debate, a kind and loving disagreement, right? Like talk about, right? We know, well, that we're in this digital age of keyboard warriors and people saying things that are quite literally killing other people because you're not in a face-to-face conversation with somebody, right? So we've lost this piece of communication that is so important, but we've also lost the ability to disagree lovingly. And gosh, the name is beyond me right now. Something to the effect of, it was a book called, like, I've never thought of it that way, but the whole point of the book was like, disagreements are great because you're going to get an opportunity to get to know somebody a little bit better. Right. So like, you're one side of this decision, I'm on one side of this, right? So why don't we start with asking why? Why don't we start with curiosity? And even if at the end of this conversation, like, you lovingly disagree, you just got to know a little bit about somebody else, like why it ticks. It's not just a visceral response. It's not just the amygdala getting hijacked and speaking things that maybe you would regret later. It's an opportunity to get to know somebody and why they think the way they do.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that, if we go back to this last sermon series, that I really anchored to what you started, was that we're to discover understanding, to find that understanding between. We don't have to agree with each other, but at least now I understand where you're coming from. You understand where I'm coming from, and that's okay. We can still go out and have Cokes and joke around and stuff like that, and it doesn't ruin the friendship or the relationship. In fact, it probably will make it deeper. But if I automatically come in with my lines drawn and not willing to listen, then there's no place for relationship to develop.
Yeah. Oh, good stuff. What else you got for us?
Well, it's easier said than done.
Oh, sure.
Yes, it is.
Like, I'm not perfect. I'm like, right when I point the finger, like, I got 3 more back at me.
Yeah.
And some of the prep, I'm thinking about, or I've already mentioned, it takes us about a year to get warmed up to something, to develop an opinion, to understand, like, where we can contribute to the church. And there's some cool observations about our church and some things that I would love to see growth in, right? So if, from my point of view, right, if this is the sort of stated problem that we have and we need the things that we need is probably community, right? That's why I love this year. You came out in January and, like, family is what Stone Ridge is going to be all about this year. And we've done things like there's the fellowship. I think there's a noted change in, like, hey, information being spread. We got weekly newsletters, right? I'm part of kids ministry, so I already kind of know more than maybe just a person who just attends on Sundays. And I love that, but I think we got some room for growth. And if I speak from, like, just a personal need and something that I would love to see developed, it's like some sort of men's group, right? And I know, I have one of my good friends. We talk a lot, member of the church. I think that we, in talking, our kids are friends, and we're like, that would be awesome, right? If I think about, some of my peers and who they are and how they're fed, like, being in the military, like, we bond over shared misery. So, like, boy, what family needs some yard work? What family needs, like, a demo? Let's get a bunch of dudes over there and let's go to work, because that's what church families do. And let's go on some hikes or a walk. Let's do some men's breakfasts and let's get to know each other so that we could build bonds and trusts. And when somebody's falling and spiraling, we're there for them to catch them, right? And that's that's important for me. And I say that knowing that I haven't contributed to any of it. This is this tough.
You are now going to get a phone call.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, this because I aspire to be as involved as I can. This job is a difficult one for me, so I've had to put up a few boundaries in that side so that I could spend time with my family.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love that, right? And I think that
you're not. By the way, you're not the only one
Exactly.
talking about it. We're hearing it more and more. There's actually some stuff
being discussed,
and some things that are starting soon, some that are being discussed, hopefully to get started soon. But yeah, so you're definitely not the only person feeling that.
Right.
Yeah. But I think that Stone Ridge is a safe place to do that, right? Like we've had to learn, right? If we have to move every 3 years and we know that the friends that we're going to lose, well, I shouldn't say lose, but the ones we're going to be leaving, departing from, it's going to hurt. But we're very intentional with our relationships and like where we attend and who we spend time with, because like it's important. We know we're not going to see them as often in 3 years. And so I think Stone Ridge is a place for that. And I think that there's it's a place that can be accepting and thrive off of a growth like that.
Yeah, totally agree. And hopefully we'll see some development in that. Like, certainly, I'm thinking well, a friend of ours that Josh, he's already got something he wants to start doing on Friday nights. Just a really casual kind of just come to the church, hang out at the fire pit, and he's just been waiting for the weather to cool down because he doesn't want to start up a fire when it's 100 degrees outside.
I say fire and 115 don't quite go together.
So he's just been waiting for the weather break to kick that in, but there's some other guys talking about wanting to do some men's breakfast or kind of just affinity things. Hey, we love to golf together, or hey, we're gonna go clean up that person's yard. Those kind of things. So yeah, I definitely, I think there certainly seems to be interest, motivated people that are like willing to put their effort where their mouth is. So
yeah, well, good. That's exciting. I think I'm a huge relationship person, community person. I know that anything that I've only got so many people around me. I've got 5 to 10 people that I influence. Half of that is my family, right? So if we can just impact each other in a positive way and just build that fabric, like have it interwoven in between us and just authentically be a church family, that's what I want. That's what I want to give. I want that to be my bumper sticker.
So, I mean, many of the comments have been kind of focused around Stone Ridge being the small C church. How would you expand that out? How would you say, if I were to look at the big C church, whether it was, even if it was just the United States, or if you said, I've looked at other things around, what have we done well and where do we miss the mark? I mean, because, and one of the reasons this whole series came about was because the boomers, as we would refer to them, came from a different perspective of church. I mean, there was still the same pillars, but because they came through World War II and some of that kind of stuff, their look and view of how church should run is different than what the millennials look and think about it. And I know that personally because I have a 33-year-old son who we often talk about, here's where I struggle with the church, or here's where I think that we could improve. So I'm curious from your perspective, what do you see going well in the big C, and what would you change?
Yeah, I mean that's a big question.
Yes. Well, it's actually two, but
yeah, I think that what I fall back on, like what can we do? I mean, like I told you, I'm a 3 bullet point kind of person. Let's keep it simple for me, KISS. I think it's just as easy as loving. How do you love God? Like, what does it mean to love God with everything you've got? But where I'm going to hang my hat up on and say that we could improve a little bit on this is loving your neighbor, right? Current times in thought, I don't care. And what I hope to impact and impart on my kids is that I don't care the color, the gender. I don't care what they believe, right? I want you to learn, and I want you to see me loving your neighbor. Like, what does that look like? No exceptions, right? If I think that there's a place that we can impact, like, let's go to the places that people aren't going, and let's just love on people, right? Like, you guys, we live next to a border, and God didn't draw that line. Man drew that line. Right. So if what does it look like to love your neighbor? Right. In all cases, no exceptions. And it's a tough one. That's not an answer. It's not a cop out. But if I can just impart that, I think that let's just show that a little bit more.
Well, there's so much in the Old Testament and New in the Scripture about, in the Old Testament, the language is loving the alien among you, like the outsider among you, and I don't know that the modern church has captured that well. I mean, in some expressions, yes, and some no, but I think certainly I agree, room to grow, a lot of room to grow.
Yeah, and as said before, I'm not perfect, but this is just, it's on my heart. And if anything, maybe it's a confession more than anything of where I want to be as a Christian, so I can bring others to God, right? I'm telling you, yelling at them from a microphone just isn't doing it for a lot of people. So
I have an unconfirmed opinion, I'll say it this way, that you could probably speak into, because two of the questions we asked you to consider before coming into this was, what are the opportunities for the church to make a big impact in our world right now? And then a follow-up question was, how could the church more effectively reach your peers, like millennials and people in that space? And I kind of feel like the answer is almost the same. Like what you just said about, if we were out really doing things that were demonstrating the love of Jesus and very practical, just like, I think you gave the example of going to somebody's, a bunch of dudes going together, someone's yard, just clean, knock out complete stranger or whatever, their yard. That it's that kind of thing that your generation, your peers will say, now that's cool. Do you agree with that? Do you think is that an avenue of today's church doing a better job of capturing the attention of millennials and even younger generations is by those more practical expressions of love?
Yeah, I think big impact is small. I think that that we're not gonna win the hearts of others by taking to social media platforms, right? You might have an echo chamber there, it might be pretty good, but I think that to authentically show God's love, it's got to be the person to your left and to your right. It's got to be your family, right? And to look sort of inward rather than so outward is important. So I think that by being a church where we could show that is important. And I think that, if I observe, there's things that we're doing that are making impacts. I think of Power Pack. I think of my neighbor, right?
Well, you just spoke Scout's love language.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's secretly, that's my wife's love language too. Feeding children is where her bucket is full, right? I think about Bart and his homeless ministry. I think about how cool that is to see what he's doing there. There's a man who is just kind of going out and doing stuff like that. And those are the areas where not everybody's comfortable operating in, right? But there's, we're spreading, that's his bumper sticker, right? That's who he is. So I think if I can answer, big impact is small is where I think that some of my generation will see. And maybe that's just my impression. I feel like these things change based off of what's cool on the internet. So I don't know, right?
But it's often, at least I've heard it, several times that um, the millennial generation will look at the church as it is, as not always being real, as at times being very hypocritical, because of how the older generation has expressed it or brought it forward. That, and I don't know how much of that is true as compared to the older generation, or is it because we are so technologically advanced that there's more information out there, and so things that things that your generation can question and go, hey Google, hey Siri, hey whatever, the boomer generation couldn't do. They had to go to a bookshelf and pull off an Encyclopedia Britannica and hope the answer was in there. Sorry, Siri, my phone just went off. um, do you? I mean, when you talk to your peers and things like that, is the criticism or feedback about the church really about they talk a lot of stuff, but they don't do what they're talking about? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I am holding on to the word hypocrisy because you said it, and I think that that's very important to. And and here's maybe where maybe I'm an outskirts, maybe an outlier in this. I'm like anti instant gratification, so I hold out for the long. Everything from like my Amazon cart, like I don't touch it for 3 days. Like I'm going to think about this decision, even though I really want it. I'm not going to do the thing, right? Because then I probably don't need it. So if I think about this and answer that question, I do feel like there's some hypocrisy and it's felt right now. Like I just told you that the world has felt really heavy right now because it does not compute brain. This is like not fruits of the spirit. I've got people in very high positions who are saying things that doesn't quite seem like they're representing me and Christianity. So I feel like there is some too. I don't know if I could specify and to say all churches because I've had some good experiences with churches. But I would say some of its members, we could all use a little bit of nudge in the right direction on that. Mm-hmm. But it's tough too because it's not. I don't want to say the normal American way, but we're self-centered a lot, and if it's not good for me, then it's maybe not good for the cause, right? So again, by being somebody who's a little bit of an outlier, I would be happy to make things harder on myself for the benefit of somebody else. But that's what's important to me. And maybe it's just a result of kind of being fed up with what I see on a day-to-day basis. Maybe I just got a screw loose, which is quite possible. Yeah, that's my thoughts. I felt like more of a non-answer, but that's what I got for you.
How would you, if you were talking to a group of millennials and you were to say to them, here's how I think you could impact the boomer generation, what would you say to them?
Well, I think about, I have to think about my parents a little bit.
My age group.
Yeah. Yeah.
A little older, but
really old.
And maybe this is where this question makes more sense now, because now I think about how, stubborn it can be. And I don't want to say that we are more progressive in thought, but I mean it not in the political sense, but just things are different now in almost every single way. And God's word is God's word. But when I think about this question, I think about the stubbornness. I think about the movie Jesus Revolution, right? And I think about how that was a culture shift and the adaptation that was needed, the adaptation rather, that was needed to further the mission. So I think about that. I think I would do it with loving kindness as best as possible, right? I think that I would listen. You have to listen, and that's the first step of it. But I think that we need to have room, right? In a world of instant gratification, we need to have room to be able to listen, to receive, to develop thoughts, and then not have to win, not have a Pyrrhic victory, right? But to listen and to understand, right? So what would I focus on? I would focus on my small group and my relationships. I would say, more of my time is going to be spent listening to who my people are, what they are, what they're about, what their, triggers are, what their comfort places are, and get to know that. So then the trust and the bonds and relationships can be in place to then have those deeper conversations. Because when we're in a world where we can type anything we want and it's in an echo chamber, or if it's, I only have enough attention span to watch something for about 15 seconds and then I'm done moving on, I think that the example would be to show that it's more of a long game than it is a short game.
Well, and reading into what you just talked about, part of that is saying I need, if I were speaking to a room full of millennials, is pay attention to the people around you and not worry about the larger group of people that might like or not like or tell you how good you are in social media, but look at those people directly across the table next door to you, your family, your friends, and pay attention to what's happening in their lives. And when you're working with the boomers, slow, or whatever
Quick,
it was.
slow.
Quick, slow. Take time to listen. Take time to really come up with understanding, and don't trigger that anger so quickly on both sides, for that matter. But the question was for you, talking to a group of millennials to boomers. I kind of tried to send out what I heard you say. Am I close?
Yeah, I think so. At least as far as I understand the question. Admittedly, our favorite people, Kate and I, are like, she used to work at a VA, and like she just loved that population. Older, right? Lots of stories, lots of listening, less talking, and we naturally gravitate towards that. So we're a little different in that sense, I guess, maybe. But I think it was a great synopsis on it. But now I'm curious, right? Like you mentioned too, like what do you think some of the difficulties that your son has in communicating with you as a boomer?
Well, I think you nailed it on the head. I think that even in my middle age years, I had to go through. At that time, I was an administrator in long-term care, or I was actually working in the field, but was studying to become an administrator. And I had to go through a what they called an assessment center, which was basically a day-long assessment of how would you deal with this? How would you deal with this? How would you deal with this? Everything from budget to communication to HR to regulations, all that kind of stuff. And it was like 8 hours of intensive of what would happen. When I came out of that, they said probably one of your weaker areas is critical thinking. And so I had to go back. They actually said, go back to school, get some training on critical thinking. My son, quite frankly, is much better at critical thinking than I am. And so when we have conversations, he will bring up things that I had not thought of. It hadn't even crossed my mind. But I think it crosses his mind because he's so connected to so much more information than I ever was. And so, my world was, at that point, when I was in my AIT, my world was just this little city in Colorado. My son, even though he lives in Yuma, is all across the world, simply because of technology. And so he gets to see many more perspectives on issues than I ever have, which I think has been really good for me to be able to hear those perspectives. But it also has been really good for me to go, but where do I stand on that? Where is it that I can go back to my scripture and go, okay, here's why I believe what I believe. And it has nothing to do with Facebook's current take on it, or this is where the trend is, or I stand on it because this is where God laid it out for me. And so this is why I stand. So I think it's been very good, but I think it's mostly because his critical thinking and view of the world is so much larger than mine ever was.
What what challenges do you think you have in connecting with millennials? Like, do you think that it is, you think it comes down to just your inexperience? I mean, you laid it out, right? This is what your son sees. He sees the bigger world and critical thinking skills. Like, do you think it's just, do you think it falls on that? Or what do you think your challenges are in connecting with my group, my generation?
In some ways, that's really hard for me to answer because I feel like I'm pretty good at connecting with people in general. I think probably is that the older I get, I'm not as quick thinking as my younger counterparts, so they can think a lot quicker than I do. I think there are pieces that I grew up believing to be true, believing to be right, believing, and let me give you an example. In my world growing up, authority was everything. You listen to your dad, you listen to your boss, whoever was an authority, you listened to them and you were obedient to them because that was the expectation of culture. As I've gotten older, and a lot of the studies I have, at least a lot of the things I have read has pointed to the fact that the Toms in your generation have seen such failures in leadership, whether that is in the church or in the government or even in our parents, that the trust level of authority is significantly different than it was in my generation. And so when I talk about it, I come from a stance of it's my job to listen and to at least be obedient and consider that, where my son would say, yeah, but have you thought about this and this and this that may go against what that authority is saying? So I think there's a piece there that I've had to really wrestle with. I think trust is the thing, is that my generation trusted authority to a much greater level than his generation does.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I think the observation is, right, again, another one of those outliers. Like, I'm very much a rule follower, so I put a lot of trust and deference in the next rank up, the positional authority. I think that's very important to me, but I don't think it is in a lot of my peers. Maybe outside the military, if I go into a different pot of people. What a good observation. That's interesting.
It's, so if I would ask my son, why would you do that? His immediate answer would be, why wouldn't I do that? Because he's twisting it to say, because my thing is, why would you do that? Says there's an authority that would say you shouldn't do that. And he's like, why would I listen to the authority? Why? And it's interesting because my son is a police officer, so you would think that he would. So it's interesting that he's chosen that field.
Well, I think communication is huge, right? So I love the curiosity out of why would you with anything, right? Like my kids, like I can't get mad at them for asking why. But how it comes off to you is a little different. But I think it's important to understand that, right? Like it's part of the greater conversation is how can we do this well? And it's taking both perspectives into account.
Yeah. So we need to wind this down, but we always like to give our guests kind of a final shot. Anything connected to this conversation that maybe you wanted to say and we hadn't got to yet, or something that's come up during the conversation, like, I didn't get to throw that in, wish I had. So your opportunity for a final shot.
Yeah. Well, I guess I wouldn't call this a shot, maybe a shout out.
Fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So I'm
final word. Well, let's just give it that. Whatever final word you want to add in.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I say this as we're sort of sitting in a room that is our kids' ministry, right? And I'm sitting here and I think about how powerful it is for us as leaders of this generation that is going to hopefully impart as many of these good qualities that God and that, Jesus has shown us on his walk on earth. And I think that we've got a tremendous responsibility. And what's cool is that I think that there's a dedication at this church to want to get that right. Right? I think we can all say like execution is always hard. There's always just things that we deal with. But what I love is that, and especially maybe it's like with the educational component that we're doing now in Ridge Kids, there's a piece at the end that I really love that you can only really get away with a little bit older kids. So maybe this is, different with my 4th and 5th graders.
Mm-hmm.
But there's critical thinking that's in there. And so I immediately thought about this when you said it, Scott, was because I think it is so important to develop the critical thinking skills of our kids. Not in a way to defy authority, but when somebody says something that just does not jive with what you know to be true, if something comes across as not a fruit of the Spirit, do I have enough wherewithal, critical thinking to recognize that? And I think it starts with the forgiveness. Like, what experience have you had with forgiveness? Mm-hmm. And let the kid just take and roll with it, right? The kid's probably going to talk about something that happened to them. They were seriously wronged by the extra scoop of mac and cheese that their sister had. But we're developing the conversation and we're asking the questions to let them develop thought. And so I think whether it's the books that I'm a huge fan of reading. My wife and I, it's one of the biggest things that we can offer to our kids is the importance of reading and getting to know the world and in our history, all of it, right? And so I think it's very important to help them develop critical thinking skills, right? And then we insert into that church and God and the love and these stories that we tell them. And it all intertwines together to like, how can they be a world changer? And right. And so if I wrap it up full circle, I love the curriculum that we're using here in Ridge Kids. I think that we got the right person who's got the love and the care and wants to give it the attention to detail to lead the kids ministry, and being a part of it's so cool. Even the days where I only got 1 or 2 kiddos with me in Haven, it's always the highlight of my week, right? Whether I walk into that moment truly believing that or not, boy, I get one of those kids who say something to me or who give me a moment to just make me pause and be like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be right now.
That's awesome. Well, thank you,
Good stuff,
James, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Diet Coke, for unofficially sponsoring and keeping me awake through the whole thing.
Paid their stock again.
All right. And we hope this prompts faith-filled conversations in our listeners' lives, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks for having me.